Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. Thank you for joining me here on this video. Really looking forward to talking about today's or this week's tech and diving into a bunch of different other topics with new releases that have came up, news that hit the waves. But first and foremost, just again, thank you for being here, and I hope you have your coffee or whatever beverage of choice that you have. So here I have my coffee ready to go, already on my second cup, and still sticking to the Saturday mornings just because that's the only time that I have available. But hopefully it changes up and something different comes up. But why don't we dig into some of the news that came out? The first thing I wanted to mention was Wi-Fi 7 news, right? Juniper just announced their Wi-Fi 7 access point. You've got about three different models, right? And these models, they are the AP47, the AP47D, and the AP47E. What's neat about these three models is one has an integrated directional antenna. And I think having that integrated directional antenna is useful for deployments indoors for campus environments. Usually we have a number of access points we need to put in a high capacity area, and doing omnidirectional antennas, it doesn't help as much when we have a dense deployment. So I think it's really neat that there's a directional antenna built into that AP, and then we've got the external connectors as well. The AP themselves, they're tri-band, so we're in the next iteration of APs coming out with Wi-Fi 7, but these APs do support the 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz. They're 4x4 APs, so they're capable of doing dual 5, dual 6. You've got a dedicated scanning radio that's in them. They mentioned something about AI learning, RRM, whatever that means for MLO. And then there's converged Wi-Fi, IT, OT, and then IoT gateway in this thing. Also dual BLE. There is ultra wideband in it. Also big on these units are two 10 gig Ethernet ports. And looking at this AP, I'm wondering how large this AP is going to go. And I didn't look at the dimensions of the access point, but I'm assuming it's a pretty large access point given all the different radios and capabilities this AP has. Additionally, the two 10 gig Ethernet ports, right? What kind of PoE are we talking about here to support this access point? What's neat about the 10 gig Ethernet ports, though, is with those two ports, you can have high availability and seamless failover. So you could connect this to two different switches. Now, hopefully people don't create loops when they do this, but it will have you thinking about what kind of switching infrastructure upgrade plans you have. So you better start preparing if you haven't upgraded your switches from Wi-Fi 6E. You're probably going to want to look at newer switches now, all 10 gig Ethernet ports. So the cost of all the hardware and your infrastructure is really going to increase, and you'll probably have something to really think about with your infrastructure plans. And so given that this is a really capable AP, one of the things that got me with this access point is in the announcement, they had mentioned in there it uniquely maximizes the full potential of Wi-Fi 7, right? And with some of these APs that have been coming out, have been released with Wi-Fi 7, they don't fully support everything that was put into Wi-Fi 7, into the protocol itself. And so I am really interested in testing this AP out, comparing it to others, and seeing what can be maximized out of Wi-Fi 7 and the APs. So they're saying it's going to be seamless and cost-effective and more sustainable transition to the latest wireless technology. A lot of buzzwords, and and in my opinion, talking about cost effective, because I've got some APs down here beside me, which are just a fraction of the cost of what this access point would be if you were to look at the price. But of course, once you've got your Wi-Fi 7 APs, like I said, you're going to need to upgrade your switching infrastructure, right? You've made these purchases into Wi-Fi 7 APs. It's tri-band, going from 2x2 radios and Wi-Fi 6E to now 4x4. One of the things we will need to consider is, hey, I need to maximize my ROI of this AP and put 10 gig Ethernet ports for these APs. And we're going to need twice the amount of switches because we want to leverage high availability and seamless failover, if you want to utilize those features. And so there are new switches that have been announced alongside of the Wi-Fi 7 AP, which is the AP47. You've got your EX4400 48 MXP and also the EX4400 48XP. Now, these APs or these switches have a lot of PoE capability, 10 gig Ethernet ports, and it just reminds me of how back in the day we used to put chassis in the closets. And I'm wondering if we're going to start doing the same again because of the dual ports we have on APs. Now we need to connect them to separate switches or even separate modules in order to have that high availability and the seamless failover. Are we going to have a lag that goes to these access points? There's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things to test before we start going down that path. But it's not the first time we've seen this. I think we've seen other vendors also announce an AP that has two ports, and you could be able to do PoE from two different switches, and you could do high availability. So it's not that new, but it is new for Juniper in what they'll put at the edge. And so that's just something to keep in mind as you go through demos for AP47. Your salesperson will probably say, hey, why don't you try out the EX4400 48 MXP as well, right? And then you can add a module to the switch in order to get your uplinks. I think you can do 100 gig uplinks on this switch. Now, that is not the only switch that was announced as well. You've got your EX4100H, right? Your hardened switch. And now I've been looking at some hardened switches over the last couple of weeks because I have some pretty unique deployments that would require a hardened switch because of these switches from Juniper. They're too large, right? We can't put them outdoors. I'm not going to put a huge cabinet just for this switch. And also we don't need the port density for some of these 1U switches. So I was looking at hardened switches, and conveniently, the 4100H is something that I would be interested in because I needed additional PoE. A lot of the industrial switches are still only providing about 30 watts. We've got APs that are demanding more PoE. So the 4100H can do PoE++, about 90 watts per port. You can see it's got 4 SFP bays so that you can be ready and set to go and manage this in the dashboard. And so that's what was a big advantage for me, is looking at these switches. I have Juniper switches managed in the Mist cloud, but I wanted to manage also the hardened switches, the industrial switches. And this would be a great use case. Now, the only downside is I can get hardened switches for under $300. So I don't know what the price tag is for the 4100H, but I can be absolutely sure it's going to be a pretty big investment depending on where you're going to place this switch and what your requirements are. So if you're going to need Marvis and AI, easy to manage hardware, then you're going to want to go with this. All right. So that was the Juniper announcements. Pretty big for Juniper. They're now pushing their Wi-Fi 7 capabilities or Wi-Fi 7 hardware. I think we have a vendor or a couple of vendors that we're still waiting for when they're going to come out with their Wi-Fi 7 AP. But hey, Wi-Fi 7 is still really early. I think a lot of people have not even tried migrating to Wi-Fi 6E yet. But I did come across this post on LinkedIn, which I thought was interesting. It's kind of hard to read, but it was talking about how you should go about purchasing a Wi-Fi 7 wireless router. And this is really catered towards people, the consumer, so at the home. And so to me, there's this thing called capability, and we have to match that with reality or what's actually going to happen. And I think marketing is doing such a phenomenal job at pushing Wi-Fi, making it the best ever Wi-Fi with Wi-Fi 7. But the end users, the consumers, have no clue that they have no clue what we're talking about, right? We had to go from talking about 802.11 to using some simple terms like Wi-Fi 7. And all the end users know is that a higher number is better, right? So we went from Wi-Fi 6 to 6E just 2 years ago, and now we're at Wi-Fi 7. And the purchasing that the consumers have to go through is difficult, and it's confusing, and it's costly, right? And so if you look at this compared to the iPhone has done really well in terms of saying, hey, we have an iPhone 16. And so they're kind of shaming you if you've got an iPhone 10 or older. And I think we've failed as an industry where we're making these consumers overpay for Wi-Fi that they don't even know they can't use, right? So you're telling people, look at these Wi-Fi 7 routers from TP-Link or Asus and look at the cost, right? You can get, now there's different, the consumer levels have gone to using different types of models as well, where you can pay over $200 for a basic Wi-Fi 7 router. Maybe it's a 2x2, but hey, if you want to do 6 gigahertz, you're gonna have to pay $100 more. And so now the idea of thinking about how much this is going to cost, I will have better Wi-Fi, I can do better gaming, I can do all these fancy things, right? We are preaching to them about how much better Wi-Fi is, but we don't ever talk to them about backwards compatibility, all these older IoT type devices. Your refrigerator probably can't even connect properly if it sees the wrong information element, who knows? And so we don't talk enough about that. And we talk too much about, hey, just upgrade to the latest version, upgrade your router, and then go get the latest Google Pixel or the latest Samsung and the latest iPhone, and you're set, right? And because now we're saying you can go up to 320 megahertz wide channels, we still don't mention if these devices can support the higher channel width. And I think that's where a lot of people will start doing their tests to identify like, hey, this really isn't working. And so now we're just measuring ourselves, right? Are we really just paying more to measure speed tests against each other? We're really just all sharing speed tests like, hey, I'm faster than you. No, I'm faster than you. And I think that's great to have that. But in reality, how is this going to sustain itself when we have still much older devices that aren't supporting Wi-Fi 7? Then we have devices that do. Now we got a mix. Then we have the whole confusion with security. They don't know what OWE is or WPA3. They also don't care. They just want it to work, right? And so that's just kind of an interesting post I saw on LinkedIn, doing a breakdown of how you should go about purchasing your Wi-Fi 7 router at home. And I thought it was a very long post. And right away, I just know no consumer's going to read this thing. It's way too long, right? They just need to know, is it going to help me do my Zooms better when I'm in a meeting? Is it going to help me game better? Is my latency going to be much lower? That's really what we should be measuring, and also the device capability and how older devices will affect newer devices on that Wi-Fi network. So that's the LinkedIn post that, I was browsing LinkedIn, looking at Wi-Fi 7, trying to see what people are saying, what what kind of feedback people are having. How are the Wi-Fi experts weighing on this? Are they too expert for consumers? Probably, right? So what do you guys think about Wi-Fi 7? And have you upgraded your home to Wi-Fi 7 yet? I'm curious. Put that in the chat. So the next couple of announcements that I saw that came out were with Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti seems to have a lot of announcements. They have a lot of products, so they have a lot of updates they have to put out. But I did see something about Ubiquiti Verify for multi-factor authentication, but it's just another app we can manage our logins. And with the amount of apps that are out there, I'm just curious if people would start also using Ubiquiti as trust the company in managing your logins for your accounts. I would maybe try testing it out with my UniFi account to see how it works. But from the screenshots, I installed the app, but I haven't fully signed up. But from the screenshots, it does look like you're able to use all of the other applications to manage your login. So we have yet another app. I thought it was interesting that Ubiquiti even came out with one, being that most of their product line is around networking. But they're branching out to way more other things, expanding their products and their capabilities, which I will go into. But it's just curious if you guys are looking for maybe a cost-effective password manager. Ubiquiti has one out there, and if you're already in the Ubiquiti ecosystem, then maybe this is an app you should consider using. Maybe it's a lot more easier to use than some other apps. For me, I'm more of a 1Password kind of person, and everything's all built in. I have a workflow. I'm curious how this workflow would be for the Ubiquiti Verify. Another announcement that Ubiquiti made was their mention of the UniFi Protect 5.0. It's in early access at this time, but hey, you've got this capability of an enterprise NVR as well, which is going to be available on September 30th of 2024. And what I thought was most interesting with UniFi Protect 5.0 and the enterprise NVR is its capability of supporting third-party cameras. And in the screenshot, you could see a third-party camera that seems to be added to a dashboard. It also says on their post that they can manage about 1,000 cameras with vantage point scaling. But when I was reading the product page, it said it can manage 1,000 plus camera sites. So I'm not sure which one it is, because when I looked at the specs for, I think it was the Enterprise NVR, it actually showed a capacity for 210 HD cameras, 140 2K cameras, and 70 4K cameras. And I don't know where the 1,000 cameras kind of fits into there. Maybe 1,000 third-party cameras? I don't know. But we're talking about a huge NVR, and it's a nice server. And honestly, I feel like they took this server from Apple. It looks like an Apple server. You slide it in. It's it's rack mountable, so it fits into a 19-inch rack. And I thought that was their way in, as I talk about how they expand their product line and how Ubiquiti is really making this big push into the enterprise. And so that's one way to do it, right? With cameras and doing the Ubiquiti Verify, you can kind of see how they're tying it all together, especially when you add it to their networking lineup. And part of the other releases that they announce is you've got UniFi Access Point 6.7.6, right? This is a new release a couple of days ago, and really it's just improving the management of wireless networks without disrupting the clients. And what I've seen in the past is when you're modifying your wireless network and you've got clients connected to it, once you save those changes, those clients actually drop. And that's because the changes that you make to your dashboard, they push it to the AP, and it seems like the radios have to reset when those changes are made. And I'm pretty sure there are probably some changes that don't really require a radio reset, and that's possibly what that improvement could be. And that was all that was in that line item for the release note. And then they did add packet capture support for the U6 APs. And so I have a U6 Enterprise AP. I need to join it to a controller, and then I'll try to test out the packet capture support, kind of see what the capabilities are for that. The other release for access point, there is the 7.0.69 release. This one, I think, is part of the early access. And so what they're mentioning here is improving the device connectivity to the network application, improving 2.4 gigahertz band connectivity, and also having to add stability to that, and improving their packet capture. They also fixed some bugs for mobile devices that were connecting to 6 gigahertz. So this release is more into the early access. So if you've got a production network, I probably wouldn't go there just yet. Maybe you can test it on a lab network and see what that looks like. But overall, some bug fixes and improvements in how their Wi-Fi works with the access points. I'm not sure what the 2.4 gigahertz connectivity and stability includes. It doesn't dive into, the release notes don't dive into that too much, but it'd be nice to know some of those details. And it kind of goes to last week's stream where I had talked about how crappy some release notes are. A little bit more detail would be great, because if I'm reading this release note and let's say I have clients on 2.4 that are having problems, my IoT devices or something else, I would like to know like what kind of connectivity and stability fixes or improvements there are, so I know if I should put an early release candidate. So that's something to consider when you're doing your upgrades. All right, so now the big question I think for you guys is Ubiquiti considered enterprise now? Does it tick off all the boxes, the check boxes? When you're going through your vendor selection, what are you looking for in terms of which vendor to select? You got your big names, right? That phrase of no one ever got fired for buying Cisco. I think we can throw that out the window because Cisco, I think, has a lot of things they need to improve on, but when you're looking for alternatives, is Ubiquiti on that list as an alternative for your organization? Or do you still consider Ubiquiti to be more for your mom and pop shops, your really small businesses, and your home? Be curious to know what your thoughts are if you want to leave a comment. I do know that some facilities are full Ubiquiti, especially the name of the stadium slips my mind, but the owner of Ubiquiti, he has a basketball team and they have Ubiquiti all in there. And it'd be really neat if someone can tell me how that network is operating when you've got all your fans there, all the people using their devices. Are they doing mobile ordering from their seats? Be curious to know what that looks like. But to me, that would be enterprise grade in that type of environment, high density, high capacity. You're going to have to deploy a lot of access points to support the number of users. And so I think, and I'll give you my thoughts on this, I think Ubiquiti is making its way towards being enterprise. I think they're there. I think they're more of a disruptor right now, and challenging what the incumbents are doing, right? Your Cisco's, your Junipers, your Ruckus, all these companies should be, or maybe they already are, looking at what Ubiquiti is doing, because the cost of Ubiquiti hardware compared to what you get with your traditional enterprise vendors, the gap is huge. And I think with the costs rising all around, I think it it would be great for you to look at Ubiquiti, at least test it, because there is no licensing that I'm aware of. I mean, they have support now, so you could go call someone. I haven't tested their support, but maybe we'll do a call where we do figure out how their support is on a weekday, and also after hours, just to, if you got a problem, how is their support? How big is their support? I'm not sure how big Ubiquiti is, and if they're capable of handling that. Just want to know, what do you guys think? All right, we'll move on. More Wi-Fi stuff. I'm planning an upcoming trip, maybe next weekend, but I did hear that United Airlines plans to add Starlink to their fleet. Now, I used Starlink on a recent flight, I think 2 months ago, and the internet was probably the best I've ever experienced on a plane. And I was going over the Pacific Ocean. There's no, satellite there's no antenna on the ground to connect to. It's you only get it up on the low orbit satellites. And so United plans to also retrofit their planes with Starlink. And so Starlink, not to confuse Starlink with the Wi-Fi, I didn't do a capture, so I don't know if they were using the Starlink router to provide the internet for the plane. I don't think so, but it is the backhaul, right? It is the internet out of the plane to the satellite. And the cool thing is, the best of all, is that it's free Wi-Fi for all passengers on United Airlines once they have Starlink installed. And when on my other flight that had Starlink, it was also free. And so that's they're all following the same model that Delta did, where they provided free Wi-Fi for anyone who had signed up for their rewards program. And now that we're all connected, there's just no rest, because I would have considered a long haul flight or any flight as a great time to just be disconnected, have downtime, just sit there and maybe fall asleep. But now we're all going to be hyper connected, even on the plane. And with Starlink, now you can even do more over Wi-Fi, because I was able to watch videos, no problem, over Wi-Fi. The latency was really low. It wasn't slow at all. But did you know that United used four different providers for their internet on their planes? They had GoGo. Some of these I didn't even know did internet. Thales, Panasonic. I know Viasat. So Viasat was there. And it looks like Starlink may have been a more cost-effective solution and even a better solution, which would just push all of these guys aside. That's just my thought there. But I'm actually pretty excited to see Starlink on there, because it is a way better experience for Wi-Fi on an airplane, no doubt. And so I thought that was pretty interesting to see that United is going that route. And so now it's going to push some of the other airlines to do a little bit more better for Wi-Fi. Because I don't know how many of you select an airline based on Wi-Fi connectivity. Do you know which airlines have the worst Wi-Fi? And so are you not going to use them anymore? Or maybe now it's, you don't want to spend the $8 for Wi-Fi, so now it's free. So now you can go to United or Hawaiian Airlines or Delta. Those airlines will provide free Wi-Fi to you. And so that's United. We'll be hopping on a flight soon. We'll do some packet captures, and I'll try to see how many access points they're using in the cabin, just to see how well the internet works. All right. Now, a little bit of sad news, unfortunately, but Cisco is going through their second round of layoffs, and it looks like they have hit the DevNet team, right? And so I saw this post by Jason Davis. I don't know if you guys have been to Cisco Live. If you haven't been to Cisco Live and seen the statistics they put up on a screen, and looking at their cabinet where all the data and internet connects for the whole conference, Jason is a big part of that. And I remember meeting him a few years ago at Cisco Live, I think Cisco Live San Diego. And it looks like they have laid off some people from the DevNet team. They were working on network programmability, the APIs. Jason was big on SNMP as well. I mean, his username is at SNMP guy, but he provided a lot of the data that you would see how much bandwidth was being used, how many clients were connected on Wi-Fi, all of those things. And he looks like he's no longer at Cisco, which is unfortunate. So I don't know if someone who else would take over for the future Cisco lives and how that will be handled. And also, did they do so much automation and network programmability that they are no longer needed? I'm not sure. But, if you know Jason and what he's capable of, he puts in on his post on X what his capabilities are. He's looking for a director of IT role or distinguished engineer, but he was great at Cisco Live conference. So just be on the lookout for the people from Cisco. Give them a hug. Keep them in your thoughts, because it's kind of unfortunate that this layoff is happening, and I don't know how this impacts Cisco as an organization as to go through the second round, because I have not seen layoffs at some of the other tech vendors. So how this affects their product line and the quality of their software will be interesting. So that's layoffs, unfortunately. Another part of sad news: Meraki experienced an auto VPN outage on September 18th. Many people weren't able to get their VPNs connected properly. And what Meraki has said during this time of the outage was the workaround is to reboot your appliance in pass-through mode, which is an unfortunate workaround, not really doable for many organizations, because even though it was just VPN, auto VPN affected, having to reboot an appliance in the middle of the day does affect more than auto VPN. But 11 hours after first seeing the issue, Meraki began implementing a fix. That's just what they put in kind of the updates that they had, that they identified a fix, they were going to start implementing it. But I haven't seen a post-mortem yet. And I'm curious to what the issue could have been, just so for some of us, we could try to mitigate it, right? Because I was curious if maybe if auto VPN wasn't working, could you have just configured VPN statically? Just do a regular site-to-site VPN. But you can't, because it's Meraki. Auto VPN is with all these Meraki devices. And so I don't know how it happened. And fortunately, I have one Meraki site, but they're not using auto VPN because they have some static site-to-site VPNs with a non-Meraki vendor. And I will say that auto VPN is probably the best, most useful feature of the MX line, to which is otherwise an overpriced appliance. That's all it's really good at. And maybe some, SD-WAN features, failing over ISPs pretty easily, having certain thresholds. But, auto VPN, not having to statically configure site-to-site VPNs anymore is a huge plus, right? I think that's a good thing. All right, and just to kind of add to more of the sad news, this will be the last one. But do you remember pagers? Are you old enough to remember pagers? I used to have one back a long time ago. You ever, for those of you who are on call, do you ever get paged? That's where the term came from the pager. You would get paged. And The sad part is in Lebanon, these pagers were turned lethal. They were turned into a weapon. And so thousands of them had simultaneously exploded. And I was curious, like, how did that happen? Was it triggered by a page where, coming from a certain number, it triggered it to explode somehow? Did it just start smoking, kind of like in the Mission Impossible movies? And then it just self-destructed? So it was deemed that it was not a cyber attack, but it was a compromise in the supply chain. And so wherever not this specific pager, this is a Motorola pager, but wherever these pagers were made, in the factory, someone had planted explosives inside of the pager. And so I think we've seen similar instances of this where somewhere in the supply chain, somebody put something into a piece of hardware, either for surveillance or maybe it's malware, something. And so I don't think we talk enough about security from a supply chain perspective and what happens at the factory, because I don't know if the router I have right now has been compromised and some hackers just sniffing my traffic, and we just don't know what that is. But to see it explode is a whole different story, right? Because in the last live stream I talked about weaponizing drones and how in the Ukraine and Russian war, they have jammers to try to take down the drones, right? So we're seeing more of this technology being used in more weaponized fashions. And so the same goes with super old technology like pagers. And I don't know, that's just kind of an interesting take with what's happening. Hopefully you don't even have a pager. You probably don't need it. And I think they had gone to pagers to avoid using smartphones because of what kind of surveillance you can put on a smartphone. And so now they were targeting specific people that had these pagers. And I thought that type of operation, that's like a state-sponsored operation going straight to the supply chain. And somehow whoever that company is manufacturing these pagers said, yeah, come on in. Our door is open. Go ahead and put these explosives in there. That's just crazy. All right, so let's kind of take a breather there. Let me know what you think about the news that has came out with Juniper, switches, APs, Wi-Fi 7. Are you guys testing Wi-Fi 7? Are you guys looking at other vendors now? Is the cost just too high for you guys? Or maybe your company is just increasing the budget that it doesn't matter? Price all around is going up, even the price of services, the price of everything. So I guess if the company is making more revenue, they can afford these more expensive solutions. All right, so let me talk about what I've been working on this past week. I was starting to think about how to migrate an organization away from Mac authentication. One that heavily uses Mac authentication. And we all know, or do we all know why we shouldn't use Mac authentication? And it's largely because you can just spoof the Mac address and get on the network, right? Mac authentication is used a lot in education and higher ed, where people have to register their devices so they know that if that device is registered, you're authorized to be on specific networks. And so Mac Auth was a way to do that. And Mac Auth is just not secure. So you have to look at other methods to do authentication, so that way you know that that device is that device. And I think that migrating and going to maybe 802.1x is probably the best solution, but not all devices support certificate-based authentication. So what do you do in that case? So maybe you use some sort of NAC. And so I just started thinking about that because to me, I think the end solution, and we know what that is, but the challenge is moving to that solution and then making sure it works. So we'd have to do a proof of concept in a small area, make sure that works with a number of specific devices, kind of tie that into a registration page, maybe a self-registration page, and then automate how the certificates are being added to the devices, and then ensuring those certificates are automatically renewed. And a lot of this just bubbled up because of how iOS 18, you now have not just private MAC address, but also now a rotating MAC address. And so that would affect a lot of locations that have MAC auth as a way to get on a network. So just trying to think about how that would work. And not just with any type of vendor or a specific vendor, but how that would work with any vendor, right? And being able to tie that into some of the solutions that higher ed has in their network. And yes, Kitty's review, Meraki is definitely overpriced. I agree with you. And I just think that, I don't know, Meraki was great a long time ago. It still is great. It's a great solution. It's just that, if you've got the funds, then sure. But that's why I'm talking about looking at other vendors and looking at and seeing what their capability is compared to what you have today. And I think that's good. And then talking about MacAuth, ETLS on WPA3 Enterprise. Yeah. ETLS, and that's what I'm talking about, moving from MacAuth to ETLS. I think that also is a challenge in and of itself operationally, because you need to have at least knowledge of certificates, or you could go and use a third party to help manage those certificates for you. You need maybe some sort of MDM, but I think some sort of self-registration and the certificates, if we can simplify that process, I think it would make it easier to transition there. Let's just say that, because I think teams who are very lean, they're not going to have the expertise with certificates and understand even revocation of certs. I don't think that's a lot of undertaking for generalist in IT, right? And it's a very important one, because if you mess up certificates, you mess up connectivity for everybody, and who wants that? The other thing I've started looking at is for network monitoring, I use Zabbix, and previously used to have this little micro server. I would install VMware, which is now going to be Proxmox. Then I would install a virtual machine that's running Ubuntu. And the hopes there was, hey, if I've got a virtual machine, if I needed another VM, I could definitely spin one up. But in my instance, the micro server was very much overkill and more overhead than anything, because now I have another operating system I need to update. But now I've started going more towards these Raspberry Pis. So this is the kind of kit. I have a bunch right here in the yellow boxes that I'm testing out. So this one I just set up last night. Ran into some issues where either the pre-programmed micro SD card didn't work properly, or the OS, it didn't like it, or it had to do with, because I was connecting HDMI to my monitor, and maybe the resolution was just way too high. But I've opted to test I'm using Raspberry Pi 4, because Raspberry Pi 5 is not going to work with the version of Zabbix that I'm using. So I'm using Bullseye, Raspberry Pi Bullseye software, the version. And I think doing the minimal installation is what I really want. So that's what I ended up downloading an image that doesn't include the desktop. So using an imager, I just deployed Raspberry Pi with a minimal OS. So basically had to enable SSH. And the imager, I can have OS settings, and services would be SSH, just enable right off the bat. So once I image the Raspberry Pi operating system, push in the micro SD card, connect this guy to the network. You can even have the imager set up the Wi-Fi network as well. And once it connects to the network, I'm able to SSH into it and then manage it from there. So I think I'll probably do a video on how that looks, even putting these guys together. They're not too difficult. And the kit is much more affordable than a micro server, right? I don't have to buy a ton of RAM, have a CPU, case for it. I'm going from $1,000+ for a micro server to a couple $100, maybe under 200 for these things, depending on which model Raspberry Pi you get. And so this guy becomes more now my network monitor at a remote location, and it includes Zabbix proxy that I install on it. The proxy talks back to the Zabbix server. The proxy just runs some tests, sends the results back to the server. The other thing I'm going to work on today is configuring a pair of Palo Alto Networks firewalls, a couple of PA 445s, and getting used to how those interfaces are set up, trying to play around with panorama templates to just push a config to the firewall so I don't have to manually configure everything from interfaces to zones to the policies and whatnot. So more time spent on templates than the actual firewall management. And it just requires an understanding of what the configuration of the firewall is. And then I have a bunch of equipment that I need to open. And so if you look down here, I've got, I opened up a package from Meter. I've got this access point that I need to open up. They also gave me a firewall. And so Meter is actually a sponsor of the YouTube channel. So I'll be opening this up. And my goal, so this is a Meter security appliance, MC06. What I want to do is figure out how quickly I can set up a stack without doing much. And for me, a lot of the network nowadays needs to be simple. So I want to know how quickly can I set this guy up? Can I just ship the boxes out, have somebody connect the one WAN cable, and then this whole thing talks to the cloud? So I'll have a video in the future of what that looks like, how fast it takes to configure them. I also wanted to try out Meter Command. So if you head over to the Clear to Send podcast that me and Francois host, there is an episode there for Meter Command, which takes AI for networking like a step further. And that part I really want to test out, because you don't need to know code in order to build dashboards and in order to create graphs for what you want to monitor. So I think that's going to be neat. And then I received a ton of boxes, Ubiquiti boxes as well. I'm going to have 2 stacks of Ubiquiti equipment. So I have APs, UDMs, switches. So I have a UDM Pro Max down here, a couple of the U7 APs. So this one is the U7 Pro Max. And I'll put all of these on the early releases just to test out Wi-Fi 7. I have only one Wi-Fi 7 device, but I do have a couple of 6E devices. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how roaming is on the U7, and also compatibility, things like that. I also have wall plate AP, U7 Pro wall, and I want to know which one of these actually supports Wi-Fi 7 features. And then going into some of the AI stuff, there's this camera, UVC AI Pro. I don't know what AI goes into video cameras, but it'd be nice to test out. some of the cameras, I'll probably point it towards the lab. So when I start working on the equipment, I can pull up the video. You can see, I'll create some future videos. Maybe we'll do it on a live stream where I just kind of put these things together. But Kitty, you're asking, based on customer requests, are you seeing less companies asking for Cisco installs versus companies like Ubiquiti, Meter, etc.? I still get, requests for Cisco. I think there are a lot of people who are still just used to Cisco, and the thought of migrating away from what you know to something new can be daunting. And so I think, that's probably something people consider quite often. And that challenge really comes from the IT team. When I speak to IT managers or directors, they just want solutions, right? They want a solution. Does it work? We'll make the team learn it. And so that's kind of what that looks like. And for me, because I deal with multiple vendors, I don't necessarily push one specific vendor. I kind of look at, okay, what's the team capable of? What's the requirement? And is there a solution that fits it? And so I don't always push a full stack vendor. I may say, oh, you have this kind of security requirement or firewall requirement. Maybe you should go with Palo Alto because it does give you, I'll give you an example. If you want to see the traffic that's being blocked, what is a source, destination, IP for a specific application, and you want to see that log, you want to block certain, applications, maybe a very granular level, then you want to do maybe a Palo Alto and you have the budget. But if you just need something simple to set up, and we'll call it a firewall, and you don't know how to set up VPN to your other sites, maybe we'll look at Auto VPN from Meraki, and maybe you still have kind of a decent budget. But if you don't have a budget and you're okay with not having much insights, and you just need it to work, and you're not really going to touch it, then maybe Ubiquiti could be an option. Or maybe you want kind of a mix of all of them, and you want to move to an operational model. So maybe it's Meter or Nile, something like that, right? So I think it just depends on what the requirements are, the capabilities of the team, the budget that the organization has, and then it's a budget. Is it going to be something you'll allocate every year, 3 years, 5 years, something like that? So a lot to consider. So those are all the boxes. What I'm working on. Some of this weekend. So the Raspberry Pi is definitely this weekend. And then the rest, who knows? It's a lot to take in. And then as we end the show, what I will talk about, what I've learned, right? Last week, I talked about remote work and how we should be able to work anywhere, especially as network engineers. You don't always have to be in the office. I don't think so, because you're usually just sitting there at your desk. There are some instances where you need to go on site, especially to replace equipment, troubleshoot and SFP or fiber, whatever. But I've come to realize that we've gone from commuting to work to now just being at our desk and being on Zoom all day. And I think that's the part that sucks. And I don't know which one I would trade. I think they're both the same almost. At least when you're in a meeting, you're maybe at the comfort of your own home, or maybe you don't want to be at home at all. But I think it's just the trade-off that we've going from driving into work, being at work all day, driving back home. Now I just get up from bed, come to my desk, open up Zoom, back-to-back Zooms. I don't know about you guys. But with all this equipment that I have, I think the importance of, with work, leaving room for learning and labbing. And I think with everything I have here, I can stage up some labs. Maybe we'll test some things on the next live stream, being able to look at some equipment, test some scenarios, see what happens, right? I think that'll be pretty fun to do. And maybe test out certain features that you wouldn't likely test out on a production environment. But I think that's why it's important that you leave some time and budget for learning and labbing things, and especially when you need to have IT be more of a catalyst for your organization, where maybe you need to be more innovative. Maybe you need to enhance some things so your company can have more of an edge over their competitors. But that's really all I had today, guys. And we're right up at the hour. I was hoping I wouldn't go over, but I want to thank you guys for joining me here on this live stream. Thank you, Kitty's Review, for adding your comments in there. Appreciate it. And let me know if you like this time. If not, I'll try to switch it to a different day, maybe a weekday, because I know a lot of us value our weekends. I just have Saturday mornings available because I wake up early to take the puppy out to do her business. And then I'm just awake at this time. So nothing else better to do than talk about tech. But thank you again for joining me here. If you found any of this useful, leave me a like, or subscribe to the channel if you think you want to see more of this. And in the future, I will be doing more actual deep dives and maybe lab scenarios, just to mix it up. It's not always going to be about news, but maybe we can talk about news while we're working on labs. But thank you again. Appreciate it. I will see you guys on the next one.